All right. And the burden of proof in this situation is on uh, Brittany Edney. And so, Ms. McLaws?
Good evening, Your Honor. To give you a little bit of background, would the court like just some brief opening?
Sure. Brief.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, these parties are neighbors, which is one of the reasons why my client didn't apply for a family violence protective order because she wouldn't have, under the statute, they didn't have that kind of a relationship. There was a stalking petition that was filed. The incident in
Let me get some understanding for some couple things, Ms. McLaw. Hold on.
yes, sir.
There are some people that are on here that are not actually as a accused or as a complainant on here. I see Rod's iPad. Rod, who are you here for?
He's here for
Br-
this case, Your Honor. He's our
Okay,
witness.
okay,
Dr.
and
Roderick Givens,
and then Stephen West, who are you here for?
he's our witness, Your Honor.
Okay, all right. Go ahead.
Yes, Your Honor. On September the 23rd, 2023, the evidence will show that Dr. Roderick Givens was hosting a little get together at his home. My client, Brittany Edney, and her husband, Peter Wang, were there on the porch with Dr. Givens when Mr. Byrne and his fiancee, Nicole Frazier, arrived. The evidence will show, Your Honor, that Mr. Byrne addressed my client, Brittany Edney, who was sitting on a couch far away from him, in fact, furthest away from him. When my client did not respond to him, he continued to engage with my client. Um, to the point that Mr. Byrne indicated that if my client referred to his fiancee as a bitch again, that he would strike her. My client stood up. Dr. Roderick Givens was physically in between Mr. Byrne and my client. And Dr. Givens will testify, Your Honor, that it happened very quickly, that my client never raised her hand, didn't move in any aggressive way other than to stand up because Mr. Byrne was standing over her. He then punched her in the face. And then with his other hand, he was holding a bourbon bottle. He then swung the bottle and hit her in the arm. Mr. Wang then stood up after he saw his wife be violently assaulted by Mr. Byrne. Mr. Byrne grabs a hold of my client's arm. They end up on the floor. My client is on the bottom. Mr. Byrne is on top of her, and he is choking Mr. Wang. And Dr. Givens is observing this entire situation. The evidence will show, Your Honor, that Mr. Byrne has told differing stories about this matter, so has his fiancee. And one of them is that my client raised her hand to strike Mr. Byrne, but Dr. Givens was there, said it didn't happen. Mr. Byrne, then, Your Honor, after striking my client and he's choking Mr. Wang, they break up. Other people come, they break up. What's happening? Mr. Stephen West is a member of good standing with the State Bar of Georgia. He's an attorney, Your Honor. He was there that night. While he didn't see the altercation itself, he did speak with Mr. Byrne, who made an admission that he struck my client, that he hit her. You'll hear in Mr. Byrne testified at the stalking petition. He testified he never hit my client, but you're going to
Objection,
hear.
Your Honor. That's
Yeah,
that's not going to be evidence. That's
yeah,
argument.
yeah. So no, do you have that? You have that stalking petition transcript?
I can double check, Your Honor. We had paid for it, and I thought it had come in, but I'd have to double check that.
Yeah.
But we have ordered it, Your Honor. Following this incident, Your Honor, my client did contact law enforcement. Law enforcement never came and interviewed my client that night. She contacted law enforcement first thing the next day. Law enforcement did what they often do in these situations, which is, okay, we'll take a police report and you can come and file whatever it is you need to file. And that's exactly what my client has done. It was only after my client filed for the warrant application and filed a stalking petition that Mr. Byrne then filed his. In addition to this stalking petition, or I'm sorry, the warrant application, Mr. Byrne and his fiancee filed a stalking petition.
Objection, Your Honor.
Also,
Relevance, whether or
client.
not an act of violence was committed is solely at the specific to that evening. It has nothing to do with what they did after the fact.
Yeah, kind of stick to what we got going on that you allege in this particular application, okay?
Yes, Your Honor. That will be the evidence of this case, and at the conclusion of this matter, Your Honor, we will be asking you to issue a warrant and a bond, and that Mr. Byrne undergo psychological testing, that he be required to stay away from my client at least 500 feet, and that he undergo a batterer's intervention program.
Okay, it's not family violence. So
No, Your Honor, it's not. But I believe as a part of a bond condition, he can be required to
we're not going to
undergo.
do that. We don't do that unless it's family violence.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. Go ahead, Mr. Spitzman.
Judge, I'll be much briefer. Quickly, Your Honor, this stems from an altercation that occurred back on September 23rd. Mr. Byrne and Miss Edney and Miss Frazier and Mr. Wang used to be really good friends. They traveled the world together. Evidence shows that they kind of fizzled out. The relationship just kind of stopped. There was no incident that caused them to no longer speak or something, nothing of that nature. So for about a year plus, they never saw one another. Mr. Byrne and his fiancee, Miss Frazier, were invited over to Dr. Givens' home. They had no knowledge Miss Edney would be there. They appeared. Mr. Byrne brought a bottle of bourbon as a gift from Dr. Givens for the invite. They show up. There's exchange of words that occur. Miss Edney stands up. She goes to raise her hand as if to strike Miss Frazier. Mr. Byrne pushes Miss Edney away. Mr. Wang jumps in. Dr. Givens, who is in the middle, doesn't witness anything other than the fact that he's between the two of them. Everyone falls to the ground. And while Mr. Byrne is on the ground, he is being violently assaulted. Miss Edney bites him on the head. There's going to be photo evidence of that particular bite. And he is also hit while he is on the ground. You'll see evidence of that. There'll be photo evidence and there'll be evidence of the bite. He went home. He called the police. He reported to DeKalb County Police. They showed up. They interviewed him extensively. We're going to provide you with the police report and the audio of that exchange, Judge. Miss Edney waits till the next day. She calls the police. The police interview her and Mr. Wang. There's a video of that interview. Police officer specifically notes on that video that he sees no physical injury, and he notes it in his police report of any damage or injuries to her head. The police are called again, Judge. The police interview Dr. Givens, Miss Edney, and Mr. Wang again. And after a thorough investigation that includes, I believe, a total of 3 police reports, 3 dash and body cams, 3 separate phone calls, interviewing of all the witnesses that you're going to hear from today, Your Honor. After all of that, they determined that they could not find out who the initial aggressor is, who's the at-part fault party, and they note that Miss Edney's delay in calling the police was also a contributing factor. Because of all that, Judge, we're going to ask that you find that no warrants be issued tonight. We're not looking for blood. We're not looking for anything. We think that the evidence is going to support, Judge, that you're either going to find that this was an incident where there was mutual combat, neither of which party participated in voluntarily, but there was a fight that broke out. And while Mr. Byrne is on the ground, he is getting bit in the head by Miss Edney. That's an assault. That's a battery. That's an unwanted touching. And so while some parties may have an immunity motion that should be argued later, what the evidence is going to show is that, Judge, you're going to be stuck with send everyone to jail or send no one to jail. And what we're proposing to this honorable court is to send no one to jail, because it has been litigated, it has been investigated, and now we're here to relitigate. So we'd ask that you just issue no warrants. This just all needs to come to an end. That's all that I have, Judge.
All right. Just give me one more second. I gotta let me get back to that Linton Williams case, number 10. Okay. Before I dive into this last case, Ms. Linton, I do have where there was an issue of a temporary protective order.
Yes, sir. And
there wasn't, I don't see anything here. At least we don't have anything that was a permanent protective order. Temporary was issued, and that was issued, and there's supposed to be a
Must have
hearing
sent
on
the wrong one.
October 5th.
No, there was a permanent one that we both showed up at court. You should
October
have
4th,
a
I'm sorry.
copy too.
I don't have that. You're gonna need to send me that one, okay?
Okay, I'm gonna get it right now. She just sent me the wrong one then, because I gave my job both copies.
We're gonna come back to Linton and Williams again. Sorry about that. Unfortunately, Ms. McLaw and Mr. Spitzman, I'm gonna probably break in once I do receive that information. Okay, so try to get that case out of the way.
Excuse
No
me,
problem.
before we go dive deep, just want to make sure that I have everything that I need to send to the judge as far as evidence goes. I do have email from Mr. Byrne with 4 images, and that has been forwarded. Is there anything else that I'm supposed to have as far as evidence from either party?
We sent over 11 exhibits today. I know that the CAD's filtration system is unbelievable. So we tried to use the same process that we did with the TPO. So we zipped and sent.
Okay. Let's see. Did it come from your email?
It would have come from Robin@hsflawfirm.com.
Okay, that'll help. Let's see. Is it ROBYN?
ROBIN at HSF Hawkins Spiesman Forrest HSFlawfirm.com.
All right, let me look for that.
Okay. Let me go ahead and let's Ms. McLaw, just go ahead and call your first witness.
Your Honor, I
Judge, I
called
would invoke the rule of sequestration. There's a number of witnesses here that intend to testify. I think that Mr. Byrd and Ms. Frazier have to remain in because they both have pending applications. But outside of that, I think that Dr. Givens, Mr. Wang, and Mr. West all need to be excluded.
That's totally 100% correct.
All right, so who? Mr. Wang, Dr. Ra, and Mr. West all need to go into the waiting room right now?
Yes.
Well, not Dr. Givens. He's going to be my first witness.
Okay.
Understood. So I will be Mr. Wang and Mr. West. I will be putting you guys in the waiting room. And when they get ready to call you, I'll bring you back into the main meeting. Okay.
And I want everybody to understand, I'm going to address all these warrants at one time. So, because they're all intertwined. Okay. There could be a strong possibility that everybody gets a warrant issued against them, and then everybody goes to jail.
All right. I'm putting them in the waiting room. One moment. Here we go.
All right, Ms. McLaw.
Your Honor, I called Dr. Roderick Givens. I believe, Your Honor, you had already sworn in.
He's already
Dr.
been sworn
Givens?
in. Is that correct, Mr. Givens? I swore in you earlier.
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Yes.
Good evening, Dr. Givens.
Good evening.
Will you state your name for the record, please?
Yes, Roderick Givens,
And Dr. Givens, where do you reside?
2013 Riverbirch Lane, Atlanta.
Okay. And how do you know the move-ant, Brittany Edney?
Friends of ours. We moved into the neighborhood about a year and a half ago.
And in addition to being friends, your neighbors?
Yes,
Correct.
but she's down the street, yes.
Okay. And how do you know Jason Byrne?
He's the immediate neighbor facing my house to the left.
All right. And where were you on September 23rd, 2023?
I was at my home that evening.
Did you have anybody over to your home that evening?
Yes, I had it was college game night, so invited some neighbors over that evening.
Okay. And who were those neighbors that actually showed up on September 23rd, 2023?
We had Miss Etney and Mr. Wang, Steve West, another neighbor who was there was a gentleman named Judd. He lives in the neighborhood, and his live-in partner, Mary, and then also Mr. Byrne and Miss Frazier.
Now, in the beginning of the evening, is it correct that Mr. Byrne and Ms. Frazier were not initially at this get-together? Is that correct?
That's correct. Everyone that I mentioned was there, including Steve West, were at the premises, and later on, Mr. Byrne and Ms. Frazier made it over.
Were you sitting with Ms. Edney and Mr. Wang on September 23rd, 2023?
Yes, it's my side porch. It's open air. It's got a television and a fireplace, and a wicker seating arrangement where it's a love seat, a 3-seater, and then an individual seat. And so myself and Mr. Wang were on the same 3-seater. He was immediately to my left, and then to his left in a single chair was Miss Ed.
Now, on this side porch, if someone were arriving to come over, would they have entered the side porch to your right?
That's correct.
Okay. And if they had entered to your right, Mr. Wang was immediately to your left and Ms. Edney was further back to your left. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. When Mr. Byrne and Ms. Frazier arrived, how did they enter the porch?
Well, they entered the porch. It's if you're facing the front door, it's a side porch, and so there's just a simple walkway along the house to it. Probably 15-20 feet would be the approach distance, and they would have approached from my right side.
All right. And when they approached from your right side, what did you hear Mr. Byrne say?
Well, there wasn't any conversation until basically they came up the porch. I stood up to greet them, said hello. So basically they walked up to the seating area. And so there was the initial thing was me saying, "Hey, how you doing? Good to see you." Shook his hand, greeted Nicole. And so that was the, initial conversation. What spawned after that took probably 30 seconds before we had a full physical altercation. So it was a very quick sequence of events after that.
Okay. Now, what did Mr. Byrne say, if anything, after you shook hands and said, "Good to see you"?
Yeah, I said, "Hey, good to see you." And then he, basically spoke to acknowledge, Miss Edney and Mr. Wang, just, "Hey, how you doing?" But there was no response from them. Miss Edney was actually texting a friend. Actually, we were both she was texting sort of a mutual friend at the time. And so basically she just focused on her telephone. She just essentially ignored, just stayed focused on the phone, really did not acknowledge his presence or anything, and neither did Mr. Wang. And so that was, maybe about 5 seconds, just, "Hey, you're not going to say anything." And then there was something to the effect, of, "Well, you don't have to be a B about it." And at that point,
I'm sorry, Mr. Dr. Gibbons, who said you don't have to be a bitch about it?
Mr. Byrne.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. And was Mrs. Edney standing or sitting at the time that Mr. Byrne was addressing her?
She was sitting.
Okay. And then what happened next, Dr. Gibbons?
And so after, the comment of, "Hey, you don't have to be, a bitch about it," that's when she said, something to do with that, "Your girlfriend's a bitch." And then she stood up.
Okay. She is who?
I'm sorry, Miss Edney stood up. So she said, Miss Edney said, your girlfriend's a bitch. And then she stood up.
Okay. Now, in relation to physically where everyone's at this moment in time, was Ms. Edney still to your left?
Yes, she was still to my left, probably about 5 to 6 feet away.
Okay. And where was Mr. Byrne in relation to you physically at that point?
Immediately to my right, within 1 or 2 feet.
Okay. Where was Ms. Frazier located at that moment in time?
Probably about 2 to 3 feet behind Mr. Byrne.
Was she closer to the end of the porch, would you say?
Yes, right.
Okay.
She would have been right.
And that would have again been to your right. Is that correct?
Objection, Your Honor. All these questions have been leading. I've been pretty patient, but they're still coming.
Ms. McLaughlin?
Your Honor, I'm asking the questions, moving this along.
Okay.
He's asking leading questions. I just
Yeah.
actually asked open-ended questions.
Objection sustained.
Thank you, Judge.
Dr. Givens, were you able to observe Mrs. Frazier and Mr. Byrne and Ms. Edney as you were standing there?
Yes.
At any point in time prior to Mr. Byrne striking Mrs. Edney, did you ever see Mrs. Edney raise her hand?
No, not at all.
Okay. After Mrs. Edney stood up, what happened next?
Okay. So immediately sensing tension, and she, she stood up. Again, it was immediately tense situation. Went from relaxed to just sort of a thick sort of animosity that I could sense. I, approached Miss Edney with the intention of just simply moving her inside into the kitchen, and then asking Mr. Byrne to leave. And so I'm facing Miss Edney as she's facing Mr. Byrne. And so basically I'm in between them. So Mr. Byrne is behind me. I'm facing Miss Edney. Miss Edney is right in front of me. And at that point, we're all within 1 foot of each other. So Mr. Byrne is a foot behind me, or really, his chest is sort of touching my back. Miss Edney is immediately in front of me. And it was the most odd thing I've ever experienced, but I had no idea that coming from behind my right ear would be a punch that lands on Miss Edney's left cheek. And I'm shocked by that. And then I see, from the left of me, Mr. Byrne's left arm, or, with the bottle striking her right shoulder. And so immediately, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Dr. Givens. Were you able to observe what Mr. Byrne had in his hand when he struck Ms. Edney on her left shoulder?
Yes, I mean when he approached, he actually had a bourbon bottle that he brought and said, "Hey, this gift for the house." And so basically, before we sat down or whatever, like I said, this happened so quickly. So it was, "Hey, how you doing?" Comments. She stands up. I'm in between. There's a punch, and then the bottle thrown, just like that. So it took me a second to even realize what happened that quickly.
Okay. And because you were facing Ms. Edney, were you able to observe before Mr. Byrne strikes her in the face, did she raise her hand at all?
She did not raise her hand. There was no physical threat, no move that anybody would consider threatening. And again, I'm 5'10". I'm 205 pounds. She's probably 5'4", and maybe on a heavy day she may be 130 pounds, maybe, I don't know. But either way, I mean, there was no threatening move, and I was in between both of them anyway, with the intention again of just simply, hey, this is a tense situation. Let me just move her inside. But before that opportunity even happened, we had the punch and the swing that occurred.
Okay. After Mr. Byrne struck Mrs. Edney in the face with his fist, what could you tell? Was it a closed fist or was it an open-handed strike?
It was a closed fist. Again, it's come. It was so quickly, but yeah, I mean, my thought is that it was a closed fist that really grazed, the left cheek. It wasn't enough to knock her back, but it certainly did. I mean, it wasn't enough to knock her down, but it was at least a strike where I could see her eye open and kind of her head sort of move backwards a bit.
Okay. And then after Mr. Byrne strikes Mrs. Edney for the second time with the bottle, what happened next?
Well, and this was sort of where, Mr. Wang leapt, got up from the seat and wrapped his arms around Mr. Byrne, and basically everybody kind of went to the ground because it was a thing of Mr. Byrne grabbed Miss Edney, even though I'm in between. I actually end up kind of going to the ground. Mr. Wang is entangled into this thing, and so, and again, no time flat. There's a grab, a pull, and a fall. And in fact, on the way down, my right cheek hits somebody's shoulder, but I couldn't tell you. But I kind of was dazed for a second because it may have been Mr. Wang's shoulder in the process of getting to Mr. Byrne. But everybody's on the ground. I'm actually, my right arm is kind of stuck, in the scrum, for lack of a better word, until one of our other neighbors was able to come and get Mr. Byrne kind of in a headlock and pull him off.
Okay. When you were down on the ground, did you observe or were you able to observe whether or not Mr. Byrne was physically located on top of Mrs. Edney?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Were you able to observe whether or not Mr. Byrne was physically located on top of Mrs. Edney?
Yeah. I mean, Miss Edney and Mr. Wang were basically on the bottom, sort of pinned. Mr. Byrne was on top. Kind of my right arm and shoulder was kind of squeezed in between Mr. Byrne and Miss Edney and Mr. Wang, and it took a second for me to kind of wiggle out of it.
Okay. Did you observe at all whether or not Mr. Byrne had his arms or
Objection, Your Honor.
arm
These are all leading.
I mean, they are leading, but you just allow her to Spitzman just
I understand. I'm objecting. I'm trying to give her a little bit of leeway to move through it, but I'm objecting now, Judge.
Okay. Miss McLaw, of course, you can't do leading questions, so you'd be open.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Givens, what were your observations, if any, about Mr. Byrne's contact with Mr. Wang?
What I recall is that Mr. Byrne had sort of his right elbow kind of jammed up underneath Mr. Wang's chin because he was on the ground. His right arm, right hand is somewhere around the neck, upper, between the neck and chin area of Miss Edney. Probably about 15 seconds of that, of people kind of wrangling and kind of getting a loose. Mr. Wang's able to kind of get the pressure off of his neck. Miss Edney's kind of, trying to get his hand, from around her neck area. And then our neighbor is able to get Mr. Byrne off of everybody. So this is just all, 5 or 10 different actions all happening within about 10 seconds.
Whose hands were around Mrs. Edney's neck?
That would have been Mr. Byrne's. hand, forearm area is kind of jammed up underneath the neck.
Dr. Givens, what do you do for a living?
I'm a radiation oncologist.
And you are a medical doctor in good standing in the state of Georgia?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance other than witness bolstering?
Your Honor, it's relevant because in opening, you heard statements by Mr. Spiesman that there were no visible injuries. He's a medical doctor. I'm going to get into what his observation of her injuries were. This is why asking him
I think it's relevant.
what he does is relevant. Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Givens, after everyone separated, what were your observations of Mrs. Edney's injuries? And let's start with her face.
Okay. Well, and I actually attended to her after Mr. Byrne left also, but she did have a clear, red mark on her left cheek immediately after the altercation, as well as the probably 4.5 by 5-inch red area on her right shoulder that was really tender, and so I actually pulled out ice pack and gave her an ice pack for both areas after Mr. Byrne had been dismissed. But clearly she had been struck in those two areas, as what I witnessed when I was standing in between.
And what was Mrs. Edney's emotional state that you were able to observe after being struck twice by Mr. Byrne?
Mortified, shaking, quite upset, and pretty much inconsolable. And it took a long time to just really even be able to get her to just sort of sit down, because she was hyperventilating, and it just took a while. And by a while, I would say at least 10 or 15 minutes just to get her to calm down and breathe easy.
Was that the only time between the day September 23rd and September 24th, 2023 that you attended to Mrs. Edney?
No, actually that same night, a second time, because after the altercation, they stayed at the house probably for about another 45 minutes to an hour. We're just trying to wrap our heads around all of this. She was
Who stayed really at the house?
That would have been myself, Mr. Wang, Miss Edney, the two neighbors, the one who helped, his name is Judd, who he is the one who pulled Mr. Byrne off of Miss Edney, as well as Mr. West. So those were the people who were still at the house afterwards. Judd and Mary left. Steve stayed for a while, but eventually Mr. West left, and so it was just myself, Miss Edney, and Mr. Wang for about another hour or so. And then they said they were going to actually go home. And probably about 30 minutes later, I get a call from Mr. Wang that says, "Hey, Brittany's short of breath and she thinks she's having a heart attack." And I said, "Where are you?" And he said, "Next door at McKenzie's." So that's immediately, if you're facing my house, immediately to the right. So I hop over there real quick, and Mackenzie's a nurse. And so Miss Edney is sitting there. She's sort of pale in the face, hyperventilating, breathing hard. And I immediately recognize, when I come in, she says, "I'm having a heart attack." But I immediately recognized that she was having an anxiety or panic attack. And so there was a stethoscope, Miss Mackenzie had a stethoscope. I listened to her heart, checked her pulse. Her pulse was racing. heartbeat was normal. And then it took about 15 minutes, and I just had to get her to calm down, sort of breathe slowly, breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth, to finally get her, settled down. And so I attended to her at that point. It took about 20 minutes or so before she had settled. And I probably stayed for about another half hour and then went back home. And then she experienced a similar episode the following day.
Did you call law enforcement after you saw Mr. Burns strike Mrs. Edney in the face and then strike her on the arm?
No, I did not.
Why not, Dr. Givens?
That was something where I left it to them. It was one of those things of, look, you guys manage it however you want. I didn't feel it was my place to, call the police in that situation.
And on September 23rd, 2023, were you interviewed by law enforcement?
I was not.
Okay. Were you ever interviewed by law enforcement, Dr. Givens?
No.
That's all I have, Your Honor.
Okay, this one.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Givens, good to see you again. Sorry under these circumstances. All right. We previously had a hearing on what there's been allegations of stalking, right?
There was a hearing. I don't know what
you were called as a witness at that hearing, weren't you?
Right, I was a witness.
And Ms. McCaws was the lawyer that represented Ms. Edney, right?
Yes.
Okay, but before Ms. McCaws, you're aware that Ms. Edney was represented by a woman named Lisa West, right?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to relevance. We're here on battery.
Judge, I'm
And
about to show bias. I'm about to show bias.
I'm going to overrule the objection. Go ahead.
Thank you. And so you're aware that Ms. Edney was previously represented by Ms. West, right?
That's what I understand, yes.
Okay, and you know Ms. West, don't you?
Yes.
How do you know Ms. West?
She is the cousin of my wife.
Okay, so she's family to you, right?
Not blood relative, but I've known her since, for a number of years, yes.
How long have you known Ms. West?
Goes back to college days, so 1980s.
Okay, so you consider Ms. West a close friend, right?
I would consider that.
And is it fair to say that you referred Ms. Edney to Ms. West?
No.
Okay, so she coincidentally hired your wife's first cousin in this case, right?
No, they met.
Your Honor, he said he didn't refer her. It would be speculation.
I'm just asking him if he knows how they connected, Judge. I mean, this goes to his credibility.
Sure, I can answer.
Lawyer is
Your Honor,
he's willing, Ms. McLaughlin, he's willing to answer it. Go ahead, Mr.
Yeah. So actually, Ms. West met my wife at my wife's birthday party. So that would have been in June. That would have been their first introduction.
Okay. You said Miss West met your wife. You met Miss West.
Well,
met.
I had a birthday party for my wife and invited Miss West.
Miss West. Okay.
Right. And that's where they met. So
and by
that's where Miss West met Miss Edney.
There we go. Sorry. I think you all right. So at a birthday, and you would agree that Miss Edney's a pretty close friend of yours, right?
Yes.
Okay, so Miss Edney's a pretty close friend of yours, and her previous lawyer, who she met at the birthday party, Miss West, is a pretty close friend of yours, right?
Right. So keep in mind, they met. My wife's birthday is in June, so in June is when they met.
Okay, and I'm just talking about you. So it's fair to say that you care about what happens to Miss Edney, right?
I care about. Yeah, I mean, she's a friend, but okay. My testimony is unbiased. What happened is what happened. So that's what I'm testifying about.
Despite the fact that she retained your wife's first cousin at the previous hearing, right?
For me, that has absolutely no bearing in my testimony.
Okay. All right. That's fair. All right. So just so I'm clear, so you indicated that my client, and you would, well, I should say this, you would agree that it's unlikely my client knew that Miss Edney was going to be at your party, right? You didn't disclose that to her, did you?
No, I did not disclose that.
Okay, so when he arrived at the party with Miss Frazier, his fiance, it's fair to say he had no knowledge she was going to be there, right?
That's
Objection,
correct.
Your Honor. That would call for speculation as to what Mr. Burns' knowledge was.
That's 100% correct, Mrs. Spitzman.
So based on you took no actions to inform him that she would be there, right?
Correct.
Okay, all right. And you probably didn't tell Miss Edney that Mr. Byrne would be there either, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And that's because you didn't believe that there was going to be any friction or any issues between the two of them, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you were also aware that the two of them were pretty decent friends in the past, right?
Yes.
Okay. In fact, you're aware that they traveled the world together as couples, right?
Your Honor, objection, relevance.
Judge, there's an allegation that my client walks up and effectively cold clocks Miss Edney in the face, right? And so if there's any aggravation or non-aggravation leading up to that moment, that goes to the likelihood of the series of events as they occurred. So it's absolutely relevant.
May I
Mrs.
respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, the legal standard is whether or not Mr. Byrne intentionally made physical contact of an insulting or provoking nature with the person of another, or intentionally caused physical harm to another. So the fact that, as Dr. Givens has testified, Mr. Byrne punched my client in the face and then hit her with a bottle, whether it doesn't matter if they were best friends or not, it really doesn't matter. It's not.
I gotta agree with her, Mrs. Spitzman. So
okay,
go ahead.
I move on, Judge. Okay, no problem. All right. So you indicated that Mr. Byrne arrives with Miss Frazier and they bring you a gift for having them over, right?
Right.
Bottle of bourbon, right?
Bottle of bourbon.
Okay. And he initially says hello or greets Miss Edney, right? So he addresses her in a polite way to begin with, correct?
Well, yes, he says, "Hey, how you doing?"
Okay. And there was nothing about the way he said it that caused you concern or made you sense that there was going to be any issue, right?
Not at that immediate point, correct.
Okay. And then he says to her, well, you don't have to be a bitch about it, indicating you don't have to ignore me, right?
Objection,
Right.
Your Honor, that would cause speculation. There would be no way for Dr. Givens to know what was in Mr. Byrne's mind.
Judge, he can interpret what he heard. That's all I'm asking for. If he doesn't know the answer, Dr. Givens is perfectly capable of saying, I don't know. I can assure you of that.
I'll overrule the objection. Go ahead, Mrs. Spitzman.
Thank you. And so he indicates to Miss Edney that you don't have to be a bitch about it. And from your perspective, it was because he was referencing a non-response, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then at that time, she responds by saying, your girlfriend is a bitch, right?
Right.
Okay. And then she actually stands up, right?
Correct.
And now you indicate that at that point in time, Mr. Byrne was about a foot from you and Miss Frazier was 2 to 3 feet behind you, correct?
She's 2 to 3 feet behind Mr. Byrne.
Okay. And you indicated that at that time when she stands up, Miss Edney's 5 to 6 feet behind you, correct?
That's correct.
But what you testified to is that the altercation occurred, Miss Edney was just a foot away from you, right?
Right. And so here's the scenario here is that when we go from escalation from high to you don't have to be a bitch about it to your girlfriend's a bitch. And so I'm astute enough to recognize, okay, this is escalated from just, sort of a dislike to really something that's, you're going to be a yelling match, a shouting match. And so my intention was just simply to intervene and let's just remove, Miss Edney from the situation. Let me just push her inside and let's just, because I've never experienced something like that. I mean, everybody's professional, but that just escalated out of nowhere.
And that's because, at least part because Miss Edney said your girlfriend's a bitch, right? That helped to escalate it, didn't it?
Well, everything escalated. Yeah. I mean,
So is the answer yes, that Miss Edney saying your girlfriend's a bitch to Mr. Byrne escalated the incident?
I'm saying it escalated just the tension and the entire situation. Right.
And then you also indicated that Miss Edney went from 5 feet away from you to a foot away from you. So she clearly progressed onto the escalated situation, meaning she moved toward Mr. Byrne, didn't she?
She did close the distance.
Okay. So at this point in time, Mr. Byrne has made an inappropriate comment. Miss Edney has responded with an inappropriate comment, but then moved closer to Mr. Byrne while he stood his ground, correct?
That would be, yeah. I mean, he didn't move forward. I moved toward. Yes, she moved toward both of us because again, Mr. Byrne was immediately next to me, so he was a foot away. Right, and then so she did, basically kind of come to get closer.
Right. So So what I'm saying is, while Mr. Byrne stood next to you and did not move toward Miss Edney closed 5 feet of space and moved toward Mr. Burns, correct?
She did approach, come close, right?
Okay. And now you indicated that when you saw her come close, you turned to her to stop her from progressing toward Mr. Byrne any further, right?
Objection, Your Honor. That completely misstates his testimony. He never said that.
He can answer the question, Judge. This is cross-examination.
Yeah, I didn't have to turn to her. I mean, I'm facing her, and actually, I'm standing up with the intention of actually, approaching her, to just, hey, I really just wanted to just move her out off the porch area and out of the way. And so at that point, there was no threatening move made by her other than simply walking toward him. But really, I was in between, so she was really coming closer to me. And so there wasn't anything threatening there. But
well, hold on a second.
I didn't have to turn to her. I was automatically sort of facing her because I'm looking at the TV where she walks in.
Hold on a second. You're saying that you said this incident occurred within 30 seconds, right?
Right.
So the only way she could have closed those 5 feet is very fast, right?
Well, she's 2 or 3 feet away, so 2 or 3 steps. She stands up, walks 2 or 3 steps, and that closes 5 feet real quickly.
Okay, all right. So she closes those 5 feet real quickly. She's called Mr. Burns' fiance a bitch, and it's your statement that wasn't in any way provocative or aggressive. Is that your testimony?
No, I mean, what she says, your girlfriend's a bitch. Yeah, that's provocative. But that wasn't anything violent or threatening from a standpoint of she didn't raise her hand. She didn't have a weapon in her hand, nothing to that effect. Okay. And you would agree with me that Mr. Byrne has no duty to retreat or run away from her progressing toward him, right? He wouldn't have to, no. Okay. All right. And you would also agree with me that you were facing Miss Edney, so your back was to Mr. Byrne, right? Correct. Okay. And so you'd agree with me that you don't have eyes in the back of your head, so you can't see what happened from behind you, right? Correct. Okay. All right. So then you say at that point in time, what you see is Mr. Byrne, I think, throw his right hand around you and strike Miss Edney, right? That's correct. I'm facing Miss Edney. He's immediately behind me, and I can hear/feel his arm come around, and I can see his right fist strike her cheek. Okay. And so now, when you said that you were right next to Miss Edney, were you able to see both of her hands at all times? Yes, she was in front of me. Okay, so you said she was in front of you, but for Mr. Burns to come around you, she would have to be inches next to you, right? No. She was within 12 to 15 inches from me. Okay, and within 12 to 15 inches from you, you're able to not only see what Mr. Byrne does from behind you, but also exactly where Miss Edney's hands are at all times prior to him throwing that alleged first punch. Is that your testimony? I can see anything from the side of my peripheral vision here on the side. First of all, I felt his arm whisked by me. I heard the air sort of the punch. And then once it came into sight, I saw his right hand strike her left cheek. So that's not eyes behind my head. That's peripheral vision and moving forward. She's immediately in front of me.
Did you see where her feet were at all times?
Yeah, they were on the ground.
Okay, so feet were on the ground, hands are in the air, and you're 12 to 15 inches away from her, right?
Objection, Your Honor. That misstates his testimony. He
Hey,
said
just
her
move along,
hands
Mr. Spitzman.
were
Come on.
not in the air.
Okay, I'll move on. All right, then at that point in time, you indicate that Mr. Wang jumps off of the couch and wraps his arms around Mr. Byrne, right?
Right.
You indicate that Mr. Wang, Mr. Byrne, Miss Edney, and you, Dr. Givens, all fall to the ground, 4 of you,
Well,
right?
I'll go to the ground. That's correct.
And while you are on the ground, sandwiched between, I don't know, let's call it 500 pounds of people, you're able to see exactly where Mr. Byrne's hands are at all times, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was, yeah, I mean, I could see that his arm was, or his left arm was pinned on her chest, neck area. His elbow has Mr. Wang pinned down. My arm is caught kind of underneath Mr. Burns' chest for about 8 to 10 seconds before I'm able to wiggle out and get free.
You agree that you indicate there was 5 to 10 actions that occurred in less than 30 seconds, right? That was what your testimony was previously, that there was 5 to 10 actions that occurred within 30 seconds. That's accurate, right?
That happened pretty quickly.
And it's also your testimony, you're able to see every one of those 5 to 10 actions, right?
Everything that I described is what I saw.
Okay. When Mr. Byrne allegedly struck Miss Edney and everyone responded, wouldn't Mr. Wayne coming in from the side push you kind of toward Mr. Byrne, so you're kind of sandwiched between them?
Not necessarily.
Okay,
because Mr. Wang, when he jumps up and wraps around Mr. Byrne, there's a spin. He goes to the ground. Miss Edney goes to the ground. I'm pinned in between Mr. Byrne, Miss Edney, and partially Mr. Wang until I can wrangle myself out and free.
You facing down or are you facing up?
I'm facing down.
Okay. All right. And so did you ever see Miss Edney bite Mr. Byrne on the top of the head?
No.
That was one of the 5 to 10 actions you didn't see, right?
That's correct. Did not see that.
Okay. All right. And you would agree that that Mr. Wang's that guy's in pretty good shape, isn't he?
Yeah, he's physically fit.
Like, by physically fit, I mean he lifts weights. He's a really muscular, strong guy, right?
Yes.
You would agree that he weighs more and is much stronger than Mr. Byrne would appear to be based on your visual estimates.
I'm not sure. I mean, Mr. Wang is muscular, but he's short. I would maybe estimate his weight maybe about 160 to 180.
Okay. You'd agree with me, though, if you had to pick one of them in an arm wrestling match, you take Mr. Wang 10 out of 10 times, right?
I wouldn't take either one of them.
Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. So just so I'm clear.
Mr. Spitzman, can I need to break in for a minute. You guys going to have to wrap this one up. Hold on one second. Let me get with Miss Linton and Mr. Williams. And then I got to take a restroom break after I get with them, okay?
Come back in 5 minutes, Judge. Is that okay?
Yeah. Come back in 5 minutes. Okay.
Thank you, Judge.